Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe, and headline number one this week, Yasmin Ansari, the newly elected representative for Arizona's 3rd Congressional District, was just elected to a leadership position in Congress, Democratic freshman class president for the U.S. House, making her the liaison between the new members joining Congress for the first time and Democratic Party leadership. Considering Ansari will be the youngest woman in the 119th Congress, some people might think she's, of an age where she should be the freshman class president of a high school, but she more than meets the minimum age requirement of 25 to be in the House. Headline number two, Maricopa County Recorder Stephen Richards' defamation lawsuit against Kari Lake has been settled. While the details are confidential, Richard told the Washington Post that both sides are satisfied, and Richard filed that lawsuit after Lake, who just lost the Senate race to Ruben Gallego, claimed her loss in the 2022 gubernatorial race was due to 300,000 illegal, invalid, phony, or bogus early ballots being counted by Richard's office. Richard said in that suit that Lake's false claims had caused him and his family to be harassed and threatened, and they had to spend thousands on a security system at home. Headline number three, Arizona's Superintendent of Public Instruction, who heads up Arizona's Department of Education, says he's okay with seeing the federal Department of Education go bye-bye, something President-elect Donald Trump has promised to do. Tom Horn told KTAR News, quote, "I've always felt like the federal Department of Education does more harm than good." And he said that any civil rights issues that the federal Department of Education handles can be done at the local level by the state attorney general, an office, by the way, that he held a few years ago. And no word on whether Trump's appointee to head up the federal Department of Education, conservative education advocate Linda McMahon, who also heads up the WWE, plans to go off the top rope on the Department of Education. And that brings me to my guest today on the AZ Political Podcast, who is Howie Fischer, a guy I've been trying to get to do this podcast for a while, but he's always busy doing his job as lead correspondent for Arizona's Capital Media Services. At least that's his title. His job, at least at times, is to make politicians squirm.
Well, that's the fringe benefit of the job. Don't you understand? Journalism is a socially acceptable outlet for my hostility.
Okay. He tries to hold them accountable, and that's crazy, for their decisions and statements. And I've seen this in person when I was actually out on the street reporting. He rarely holds back when he has disdain for the subject of a press conference. Howie Fischer, welcome to the AZ Political Podcast.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So was I unkind in my description of your job?
Oh, no. I am hopefully an equal opportunity a-hole and have that reputation on the street. I mean, the fact is, people always want to say, well, you're against us because you're white, or you're Republican, or you're Jewish, or you're only 5'10", or whatever. Look, my job is to get people to answer questions. And there are so many politicians who have a little chip implanted in the back of their brain with the canned answers. And my job is to get them past that and say, That's nice, but what about, and keep pestering them. And that makes me a sort of pain in the butt. I appreciate that. But that's the only way you're going to get something truthful out of them. Otherwise, you're just going to get pasteurized, homogenized answers.
Yeah. So do you deny that you're 5'10"?
It depends on the time of the day and the amount of hair on my head.
So did this immediate past election top them all for you on the craziness or any other scale?
Well, it's hard to know, because I could make the argument that in 2016, and I've been in the business now since 71. Mm-hmm. I've covered a lot of elections. I've covered politics. I thought I knew what the rules were. I would have thought that somebody who said and was heard on tape saying you can grab them by a certain private part could not be the president of the United States.
Right.
The political rules have all gone out the window. It's become, in some ways, a cult of personality. And there are pluses and minuses to that in terms of loyalty. But I refuse to be surprised anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, in terms of just this past election, it was probably more of a Republican route than I would have thought. There were some, obviously, coattails that the president had, did not carry forward to everybody, as you pointed out earlier, certain Kari Lake, who just has a tendency to annoy people. there are a lot of Trumpites who voted for him. And while some of them, I'm sure, voted for Ruben Gallego, I think a lot of them just skipped the race. We saw that, in fact, 2 years ago, where there was a vote difference of somewhere in the neighborhood, I think, of 20,000 people who voted for Trump who did not vote for Lake and just did not vote at all. And so they just left that race blank.
It is a different time. So as far as state politics go, you mentioned Kari Lake. Anything else? Are you, let's put this right out here. Are you amazed that she hasn't conceded her race yet in the Senate?
Oh, well, she's come closer than she did. Remember, 2 years ago, up until the Supreme Court, the day after this year's election, finally put a cork in her legal challenges. She lost then by I think it was 17,000 votes,
right,
to Katie Hobbs. This year, the last numbers I saw, and they're still canvassing stuff, I think it's close to 80,000. I don't think we're going to get a concession statement out of her. It would be nice if she said, I was beaten. Be nice if she called Ruben Gallego, never mind all the nasty things she said about him and his family and everyone else. But that isn't politics anymore.
Yeah.
You don't get those concessions. You don't get what happened between Bush and Gore, where even after the contest in Florida about those hanging chads, God help us, that at a certain point that Al Gore said, okay, enough. I'm calling Mr. Bush. You're the president. I will help in any way I can.
Yeah, even though he didn't like the Supreme Court's decision to stop counting in Florida, he still went along with the process. And
exactly.
said, that's it. I give up.
But politics has changed. The other thing, and this is a little broader, when I started covering the legislature in '82, there were certainly political differences. But there was more of a I guess everyone got along with each other.
They were colleagues.
They were colleagues. They recognized we can fight during the day, and then we'll go out and have a beer afterwards. They recognized that, for the most part, people were there for the right reason, that they were trying to espouse their cause. They were trying to affect public policy, and that's the purpose of the legislature. But it wasn't personal. So much today is personal, is vitriolic, is nasty, are the kinds of things where we're no longer debating the issues, we're debating personalities. We've certainly seen that with the confirmation process that Jake Hoffman was putting some of the governor's nominees through. Talking, for example, to Martin Quesada, who is the nominee for the Registrar of Contractors, but asking whether he was perhaps anti-Semitic because he had some feelings for the Palestinian cause, his feelings on transportation issues, things that had nothing to do with the office, and then putting out press releases saying, essentially, he is a bad person, and therefore we're not going to confirm him. There's no reason for that. Look, we've certainly seen confirmation hearings that have gone not nasty, the classic Bork case in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Right.
But as a whole, they don't get that personal. It's just become nastier on the local level, on the national level. Obviously, we have a judge who felt the need to say at the U.S. Supreme Court nomination level, I like beer.
Right.
and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's different. And, maybe I'm just a dinosaur. And maybe I'm just not used to that.
No, I think there's a lot of people that aren't even in your age range, or I'll say it, our age range, that yearn for the old days, that didn't even live through those old days, but they hear the stories of like what it used to be like, where you went and had a beer after you fought on the floor instead of having that bar fight before you went to the bar, in the legislature.
There's an inflection point in here that's very important for people to understand. The original plan was for the 1964 race, Arizona's Barry Goldwater was going to be the Republican nominee and Jack Kennedy as the Democratic incumbent. Mm-hmm. They had actually planned to do a series of debates across the country, almost, like whistle-stop tours together.
Yeah.
And debate issues.
Right.
We know what happened to Jack Kennedy. All of a sudden, Lyndon Johnson's there, and he always had a whole different style, and that ended that. there was always an understanding. I mean, even going back to the McCarthy era, and certainly there were ugly periods here, but there was an understanding of we are all in this for the right reason. And so much has changed. When you start attacking people personally, I mean, so much of the new president's rhetoric on the campaign trail about evil people out there. No, people are not against you because they're against you. They're not evil. They just see things in a different way.
Yeah. I see it in this way, in the microcosm that is Arizona. Even when J.D. Hayworth tried to primary John McCain, seeing that happen, everybody always said, hey, we respect him for his service, but we don't like that he's doing this, this, and this in the Senate. Whereas then Donald Trump came along and it was, I don't respect him for his service because he got captured, along those lines. As far as Arizona politics goes, what is the closest thing to this era we're seeing now in the past? You and I were kind of laughing out in the lobby. There's a timeline of Arizona, of KTAR's time in Arizona, which goes back to the 20s. Howie was saying, what's missing here is Fife Symington, who saw the Phoenix lights in the sky and then had a press conference, and out comes Jay Hyler, his chief of staff, in an alien costume, to the podium.
And it was a sense of humor about it. We've had periods. I mean, certainly the Meacham administration.
Yeah.
Evan Meacham was in some ways Donald Trump. You may remember that the original plan had been for Burton Barr, who had been the House Majority Leader. He was going to be the Republican nominee. And he had the money behind him. He had the establishment behind him. Well, you may also remember that we had, under Bruce Babbitt and Barr, they had negotiated a 1 cent increase in the sales tax from 4 cents to 5 cents. And the plan was it was going to be temporary. Well, it wasn't like the temporary one that Jan Brewer put in, which was really had a statutory limitation. And Burt was asked about it someday, and he had these beautiful bushy eyebrows. He flashed his eyebrows. He said, I lied. He was being a smartass, but it stuck. And now we had Ev Meacham, who won the primary and then won the general in a plurality. And he saw the world the way Donald Trump does. There were the good people, and there was everyone else. And he made it clear. And so he had certain supporters in the legislature, but he had his own enemies list. He has his own group like that. Arizona did get past that. It took a while. I mean, there were still people who, even after he was impeached and convicted and thrown out of office, said, "Oh, this was all wrongful. He was just because of his policies." It's hard to say. This happens from time to time in societies. To a certain extent, we had a little bit of that during the Lake campaign for the governor, in terms of who are the good people and who are not the good people. Carrie, wanted to debate Katie. Katie said, I don't want to get into that personality. Carrie Lake, the last senatorial campaign, talking about Ruben Gallego's divorce, leaving his wife when she was 9 months pregnant, which is a fact. But, there was a lot going on. I mean, Ruben had PTSD. He admitted that. He wrote about it. Is this relevant to whether somebody makes a good senator? I mean, it's certainly a fact, but she was certainly supportive of the efforts to unseal his divorce records. There's a fine line between what people think, what they believe, and stuff that really is personal. Now, I'm not so going to go back to say we don't get involved in people's personal lives. I mean, look, Jack Kennedy was sleeping with anybody and anything.
Womanizer and probably a pill addict too.
And the fact is that there was a kind of conspiracy in the press to keep that secret. I mean, heck, most people didn't know FDR was in a wheelchair because the videos didn't show that. I don't believe we go back to that. But there's a line in there. I don't get involved. We hear all sorts of allegations. Well, so-and-so is sleeping with so-and-so. I say, is he doing it with public money? Has he put that person on the payroll? I don't care who's sleeping with whom, how often, and in what position.
So does that have to go to solicitation, or could it be purchasing lingerie with public money?
It could be anything. I mean, the fact is that, again, we see occasionally somebody has put a mistress on a payroll.
Yeah.
Now
that's happened for sure.
That's up to public.
Yeah.
Look, if he has a mistress and his wife does care, doesn't care, doesn't involve the public, they're not doing anything illegal in terms of smuggling cocaine into the country. Mm-hmm. That's a private matter.
Yeah, I suppose you could definitely make an argument in that. I think others would say, look, if they can't even be loyal to their wife, can they be loyal to the American public? Can they be loyal to their constituents? And so I get it, but yes, there should be a line somewhere.
Yes,
I agree with you completely on that. By the way, when you mentioned Ev Meekum, I thought of a classic Arizona character and political leader who came along at exactly the right moment. Rose Mofford, who was not a particularly liberal Democrat and just seemed kind of like everybody's grandma, who, of course, stepped up when Meekum resigned from the Secretary of State's office and became governor with a beehive hairdo, and just a great character. And I had maybe my most Arizona moment of my whole life. I was at a fundraiser and I went out to get my car from the valet, and there's Rose Mofford and Bill Thompson, who was Wallace of Wallace and Ladmo, both waiting for their car at the same time. Yeah. I'm like, this is insane, but we've had some great characters that have come along at times to kind of save our state.
I know, and we've been lucky that way, and we've had a lot of situations where governors have died, left. Raul Castro went off to Argentina.
Right, to be an ambassador, yeah.
Ambassador, been impeached, went to work for the Obama administration, a la Janet Napolitano. And even though it changed the politics of the state, and Jan Brewer, Republican, took over.
Right.
But there wasn't this uproar. I'm sure there were a lot of Democrats who wouldn't elect Janet Napolitano dog catcher now because she abandoned the state. Uh-huh. But Jan Brewer was also not a crazy. This is a woman who bucked her own party. She expanded the Arizona healthcare cost containment system in terms of eligibilities. When the state was $3 billion in the hole, rather than simply cutting $3 billion, which is some of her Republicans wanted to do, she said, we will go ahead. We'll cut $1 billion. We will borrow $1 billion. And we will go ahead and do a temporary sales tax, true temporary tax with an end date on it. And we saved public education that way. And so we've been lucky in this state to have a lot of people who are middle of the road. I know Jan Brewer, was certainly in charge during Senate Bill 1070, and she may have gotten forced to that politically by Russell Pierce and such, and I think even she recognized after she signed it there were things that could be done. She had it amended to make sure you couldn't use race as a factor to pull somebody over, things like that. So we have been very lucky in Arizona to have politicians, some brighter than others, some more well-spoken than others, but as a whole, we've had politicians in this state who I think have served us well.
Yeah, both Republican and Democrat.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you mind if I tell the story about what I witnessed at Jan Brewer's 80th birthday party?
Oh, please, sure.
Okay. So I was very honored. I got an invitation to Jan Brewer's 80th birthday party, which was a surprise party. And we're all waiting there. And she comes in and she is absolutely 100% surprised. And I look over at one moment and there is Howie on bended knee. And he has Jan Brewer's hand in his hand, and I realize he's kissing her ring.
Yes. Well, let me explain how that got started.
It's the best.
First of all, I had known Jan since her days in the House. I mean, we'd known each other back since the 80s. Shortly after she became governor, she was doing an event over at Phoenix Indian School, and she was behind a long desk, and I was on the other side of the desk, and I had my microphone. And I wanted to ask her something. So the simplest thing for me to do was get down on my knees and poke the microphone in her face. And Jan, having a sense of humor, holds out her ring. Oh, you're here to kiss the ring? And so I said, sure. And it became a shtick.
Yeah.
It became a shtick. And that had to do with more of Jan's sense of humor about the thing.
Right.
This is a woman, I'll give you a perfect example of this woman's sense of humor. When she was governor, she had done some event out in West Bowling Park, which is across from the Capitol. It was sunny. And I wanted to ask her some questions, as some other reporters said, let's go in the shade. So as we get into the shade, I said, Governor, is it true you natural blondes can't stand the sun? She said, Howie, I used to be a natural blonde, then I wasn't, now I am one again. How can you dislike somebody who pokes fun of himself or herself? I mean, that's what's needed. There are so many politicians who have no sense of humor about themselves. You cannot joke with them. But we had other people. I remember Jim Skelly, and that's going way back when he headed the House Judiciary Committee. And, he'd come into the press and say, hey, commies, and we could ask him anything. And he took his issues seriously, he in terms of limited state government, in terms of abortion restrictions. But you have to have a sense of humor about who you are, what you do. Take your issues seriously. But if you take yourself seriously, first of all, I don't think you're serving your constituents, because you're so busy protecting your ego. And second of all, you don't accomplish anything because of the fact that you're not making the friends that you need to make. Mm-hmm. And look, I don't take myself seriously. Obviously, you have the last few minutes have convinced, hopefully.
But I like that. I like that about you.
Yeah. But you have to do that, because otherwise it will drive you crazy and you're ineffective. I have a sense of humor. I try to joke with every governor. Meekum was a little harder to joke with, but I'll joke with the current governor about what's going on. She'll say, well, I'm not going to answer that question. I'll say, come on, Katie, just between us. Sort of thing.
Microphone in your hand.
With a microphone in my hand. I'm telling you. So you've got to have a sense of humor. And I think it serves me well. And I think it serves politicians well.
Through the years, who's been the toughest politician to cover? And this can be at the municipal, county, or state level. Who's been the toughest politician for you to cover? Who have you enjoyed covering because you were so refreshed by their honesty? And then on a personal level, who have you liked maybe the most? And I don't want to put you in a position to pick favorites, but maybe throw a couple of names out there.
I mean, the hardest to a certain extent became Meekum, because he came in with the attitude of they're the enemy, meaning the media. Mm-hmm. And we tried to work with him. I'll give you a very quick example. Ron Bellis was his press aide. And in 1987, before things got really ugly and the whole impeachment thing, a bunch of us in the press corps got together and called up Ron and said, look, it's Christmas. How about we come out to Ev's house and we'll sing a few Christmas carols just to show it's a season.
Yeah.
We won't use it politically. You don't use it politically. And we went out there. And it was surreal, because we were on his porch and we sang a few carols, and he invited us in. And I swear to God, there was a DPS officer on either side of the room, because I was sure he was convinced we were going there to attack him. So it's real hard to warm up to somebody like that. I liked people. I got along. Bruce Babbitt was probably the brightest of the ones I covered, not only because of his background in Arizona and his law training, but he surrounded himself with bright people. Yeah. So even when he was running for president, the state was in good hands. We've talked about Jan Brewer. I've known Jan forever. Jan is a likable person. I will do almost anything for Jan. I don't endorse candidates, but she's not running for anything at this point.
Yeah.
Doug Ducey was a little mechanical when I talk about the chip in the back of the brain, but we got along okay. And once he understood that I wasn't going to take the canned answer. The current governor, again, difficult, canned answers. She doesn't do press conferences. I mean, the only way, and the reporters here at KTAR will tell you.
Yeah, you have to show up in an event.
You show up in an event, and then if she may have 10 minutes afterwards to answer things. As opposed to Janet Napolitano, every Wednesday at 10 a.m., we all marched into her office.
Right.
And sometimes she'd have something to say, and sometimes she'd say, okay, what do you got? Very likable, but also had to be the brightest person in the room, at some point. In between, hard to say. I got along very well with Fife. What's interesting is that he started out a lot more liberal than he ended up. He was the first person to call on the utilities to get rid of the haze from the Four Corners generating station. He was an environmentalist. And then I think Jay Hyler whispered in his ear, and that was the end of that. But we went out to lunch regularly over at what now closed Tom's Tavern, to shoot the breeze. And if he wanted to say something on the record, it was fine. But we got to know each other as individuals, and so I understood where he was coming from. He understood what I was doing. Very pleasant person. I still run into him from time to time. Jane Hull inherited a very difficult situation, in terms of after Fife was convicted of a felony. He eventually got pardoned by
Bill Clinton.
By Bill Clinton, of all weird things.
Yeah, but that's because, did you know that story, right?
Yeah. Well,
he saved Bill Clinton's life as a lifeguard.
Yeah, as a lifeguard, as a college student or something like that. And so, you can't make this stuff up, folks.
No, you cannot.
But she was very matter of fact. But again, she was also somebody who took on her own party, created the Kids Care program, which the conservatives called Kid Scare. Essentially, the federal government was providing $2 or sometimes $3 for every dollar the state would put in to provide care for children whose parents didn't qualify for the Medicaid program, Access, Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. But recognizing kids are not expensive to keep healthy. And she took the money and just bucked her own party on this because of the fact she said, this is what's right for the state. And you have to admire people who are willing to buck their own party.
Yeah, yeah. So the future of Arizona, you've covered a lot of its history. And I don't mean to suggest like going back to 1912 or anything like that, but where do you see us headed?
Well, I don't know whether we're at another inflection point. It's hard to say. For a while, I would have said we are becoming a purple state in terms of folks moving in here, much in dismay of some of the conservatives. What are those Californians doing here? And they're bringing their liberal politics and all the rest of it. I think we are. Remember that Arizona, up until the age of Goldwater involved in city politics, Arizona was a Democratic state. It was rural Democratic, conservative. And then we got a lot of influx, a lot of retired military out here and became a Republican state. Bruce Babbitt only became governor because of the fact that Raul Castro went to Argentina. Right. Wes Bolin, who was Secretary of State, was so excited about being Secretary of State, he died less than a year into office, and all of a sudden, Bruce Babbitt as Attorney General was third in line. I don't know whether Bruce was normally electable. He obviously got reelected. But I think we're trying to figure out who we are. I mean, there's big issues out there, and we have to decide how to solve water. 100% the number one issue. Are we going to try to desalinate water from the Sea of Cortez? And are we talking about, and that's expensive. And we're talking about something that's $5,000 an acre foot. Now, that doesn't mean anything to anybody, but I did the math on that. For a typical home, if we're talking about adding, perhaps $1,600 a year to your water bill just to get that kind of water.
Wow.
Air quality becomes an issue. We've gotten better. We've closed down smelters. I don't know what's going to be under the Trump administration in terms of air quality laws and all the rest of that, and uranium mining. I think we need to figure out who we are. We used to be, we were the baby state, the 48th state, long before Alaska and Hawaii, were on anyone's mind. We've still got some growing to do. Are we a teenager in terms of being rebellious as a state? Hard to know, as opposed to, being, let's say, Delaware, which is the first state, and, they're sort of settled in their ways. I think there's some bright things for the future. I think we have to decide who we are. I think the fact that voters have shown they're willing to pick and choose among candidates, that on certain things they vote purely party line. Bottom of the ballot, I'm a Republican, I vote R's. I'm a Democrat, I vote D's. But in terms of at the top of the ticket, the governor, the Senate, members of Congress. And so I think we're willing to listen to who has solutions. We're not letting party affect us that much, despite the best efforts of the radicals on both ends of the party. And that gets to something maybe for a whole nother show about open primaries and everything else. And maybe that moderates the process a little bit. But I look, I moved here in 1974 to get my tush out of the snow in Syracuse, New York. I love Arizona. I am an Arizonan. I'm proud of the state. I'm proud of much of what we do here. There are times that things happen that are a little embarrassing to say, hi, I'm from Arizona. But I think there are good things coming for this state. I think we have to look at who we elect. We have to look at what we approve. There were ballot measures all over the board this time, from Prop 314, to which talks about, letting state police arrest people who cross the border illegally, to Prop 139 to put enshrine a right of abortion into the Arizona Constitution.
Yeah.
They rejected some of the more far-reaching items there, one put on by the Restaurant Association to give them a financial break for their tip workers and things like that. So people, if they're educated, are willing to pick and choose. The other piece of that, and I'm going to get on my soapbox here for just a minute,
Sure.
is I started in the day when there was CBS, ABC, and NBC. Everybody got their news from three basic sources. Most cities had 2-3 newspapers. Phoenix had the Republic, had multiple editions of the Republic, had the Gazette, Mesa Tribune was very active. The Scottsdale Progress under Jonathan Marshall was very active. Fewer people are getting their news from newspapers. They're getting it from the web, and they're only going to the sites that tend to agree with them. I don't know that leads to an educated public. Newspapers are not coming back. It makes no sense to harvest trees in Canada, truck them down to the United States, process them with harsh chemicals, bring them to a printing plant, put inks on the paper, and then send out what used to be kids on bicycle, now people in cars, to distribute news that is already 18 hours old.
Yeah.
Radio fills a lot of that gap there too, but I think people tend to listen to what they want. But find sources that you disagree with, even if you're just doing it to raise your blood pressure in the morning. Listen to something else, because if we don't, that's not good for Arizona. That's not good for the country. And you really need to reach out. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to read my stuff. Go ahead, pick up another paper. Go ahead and read New Times. Go ahead and read Axios or The Agenda or any of these other new forms of journalism. Read The Republic. Reach out to the Sun City Daily News, and because they've got papers now all over Valley's Independent.
KTAR.com.
And KTAR.com. And the fact is, again, look, even that has shrunk. When I started covering the Capitol, KTAR had a full-time reporter out there, Bob Scott, but so did KFYI. KFYI is not anything it used to be. I mean, it's nice to have sort of a monopoly on radio news, and the station has done a good job of having different voices on the air and different viewpoints all over the political spectrum. Some I agree with, some I think, boy, they got up on the wrong side of the bed. but we need multiple voices. You need to hear from multiple things. You need to, and recognize that people have viewpoints, that you're entitled to your viewpoint. You're also not entitled to your own facts.
All right.
Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
That's all right. And I, by the way, consider you an Arizonan. So, and I didn't come to this state till I was 11. So, it's in my best interest to, dub you an Arizonan as well. Thanks so much, Howie Fischer. Appreciate it. Arizona Capitol Media Services. I hope to have you on Arizona's Morning News some more, and maybe you'll come back around and we can have that discussion you said here on the AZ Political Podcast.
Well, if you'd stop doing stuff at 6 a.m.
I know. Nobody complains more about getting up early than Howie, I have to say.
Well, remember, I started on morning newspapers. My first paper in Syracuse, New York, I worked from 6:30 at night till 2:30 in the morning. And I could literally, this was a newspaper I was using an Underwood typewriter.
Yeah.
Typewriters, hot type, line of type, going out to the back shop. And I could write a story at 2:30 in the morning and have it on people's doorsteps at 6 a.m.
Wow.
Now, God help us if there's news occurs after 4 in the afternoon. nobody's going to see it in their morning papers, which is why it was to be like, why are papers dying?
Yeah.
So I admit, if I am up at 6 a.m., it usually means I haven't gone to bed yet.
But I read your stuff on the web. So I see it on newspaper websites. So there's that. All right. Thanks again, Howie. Appreciate it. I'm Jim Sharpe. We're going to take Thanksgiving week off for obvious reasons, so I can eat a lot, which I really could stand to skip a meal or two. And we'll see you soon on the AZ Political Podcast.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.